Thank you for tuning in to the Voice of the Victim podcast. We discuss a lot of sad and potentially triggering things on this show. We try to be as sensitive and cautious as possible, but if you are sensitive to things involving abuse and may be triggered, please think twice before listening to our show. Welcome to the Voice of the Victim podcast. I'm Rosie.
And I'm Ryan.
And tonight we're going to be talking about a very interesting case. But first, I'd like to ask you, how are you doing tonight, Ryan?
Not feeling great today. A little concerned I might have the VID.
But you can also just have a cold.
I hope so. But I still got an outline written today, so that's a positive.
Yeah.
How are you doing, Rosie?
I'm doing pretty well. I felt bad that we left you guys hanging last week, but things got in the way. We were helping a friend move, and we just weren't able to plug out another episode.
Yeah.
So this week we're back in the saddle, even though Ryan is feeling very gross. But
yeah.
He did it anyway.
Yeah, and speaking of which, this is a fitting case for how I feel this week.
Oh, really?
It's brutal.
Oh, okay.
So, definitely huge disclaimer at the beginning of this episode. It's
really?
a rough one.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah. With that said, are you ready to jump into it, Rosie?
I'm ready to dive into it, Ryan.
All right. This episode of Voice of the Victim podcast is sponsored by Best Fiends. Now that things are finally getting back to normal, we are very excited to start traveling again, which means it'll be a perfect time to play Best Fiends. Now, you've heard us talk about Best Fiends before. It's the 5-star rated puzzle game that's the perfect travel companion, and you can download it for free from the App Store or Google Play and take it with you anywhere you go. Even if you have no Wi-Fi, you can progress through the game. Now, we're definitely planning a visit to a certain amusement park soon in California that we love, and we know we'll be spending plenty of time waiting in lines. But Best Fiends will make those lines feel much shorter. So, Rosie, did you know Best Fiends has over 5,000 levels?
5,000? Well,
yeah.
That makes me feel like I'm not very far along then.
Which one are you on?
Well, I'm on 590. And
wow.
It's hard, though.
Just starting.
And it says hard on my levels now. Like, there's a little tiny skull on my level.
Wow. I wonder what level 5,000 is like.
I know, me too. Right now on Best Fiends, what I'm trying to do is this little challenge called the Tour de Minutia. It's kind of like that bike tour in France.
Oh, yeah.
Right? It's super cute. If I complete this task list, I'm going to be able to get like 4 new keys to open some new boxes and hopefully get another little fiend friend.
Very nice. So make the most of your summer downtime and keep collecting fun, colorful fiends to help you on your journey through Minutia. Download Best Fiends on the App Store and Google Play for free today. That's friends without the R, Best Fiends. So tonight we're talking about Junko Furuta. She was born on January 18th, 1971 in Misato, located in the Saitama Prefecture of Japan.
Okay.
And Japan's very special to me right now because I'm actually learning Japanese. And my other project, Wave Potter, where I talk about music, I've been very focused on Japanese music lately. It's a very cool place to me. So that said, that's the last happy thing I'll probably say for the rest of the episode.
Can you describe to me what a prefecture is?
It's basically like a state in Japan, or a county. I'm not sure how big they are.
Do you know how many there are?
I think there's several, like over 10. I could look it up if you are curious.
I was just wondering. We've talked about Japanese cases before, and I just couldn't
There are 47.
Oh. Wow, and Japan is like really small compared to the U.S.
So there's 9 regions in Japan and 47 smaller prefectures.
Okay.
I'm not quite sure how that's pronounced because It doesn't really follow the standard Japanese construction of words. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I think it's pronounced prefecture or prefecture. I only know 37 words, so I'm still very much in the beginning of learning.
4%.
5% now, actually.
5%.
Yeah, so anyway, so Junko was the middle child of 3. She had 2 brothers, one older and one younger, when they lived with her parents. As she began attending school, she was a pretty good student. She had good attendance, she got good grades, and she was also very outgoing. Apparently, she enjoyed being the center of attention. But by 17, Junko had already had a plan for what she wanted to do after graduation. So, very proactive, but she needed to start saving up money for her plan. So, in October of 1988, when she was just 3 months from turning 18, she got a job working part-time at a plastic molding factory after school.
Wow, so a very responsible young lady.
Yeah, it sure sounds like it. After graduation, she planned to begin working for an electronics retailer who had actually already offered her a job. So her ducks are in a row. Seems like she's a lot more prepared to graduate than I was.
Yeah.
But on November 25th, 1988, around 8:30 in the evening, she had just finished up working her after-school shift, and she was riding her bike home from work when suddenly someone ran up and kicked her right off of her bike.
Oh.
And obviously this caught her off guard. She had no idea what was going on and was just in shock. And before she could see who kicked her, they ran off. While she was trying to recover, another person who had seen the attack approached Junko to help her and offered to walk her home safely. This boy was 18-year-old Hiroshi Miyano, and she accepted his offer and began walking with him.
So that guy really did just run up, kick her off the bike, and left?
Yeah.
What a random incident.
I know. Well, we'll come back to it later.
Okay.
So she's getting walked home by Hiroshi Miyano. You know, he promised to walk her home safely, but as they were walking, he led her into a warehouse where he reveals his true intentions. And this is where things take a turn for the worse. He was actually part of a Yakuza, which is basically a gangster associated with an organized crime group in Japan, kind of like the mafia, except in Japan.
What was it called again?
A Yakuza.
Yakuza. Interesting.
And rather than help her get home safely, like he promised, he took advantage of her vulnerable state after that attack and went on to sexually assault her in this warehouse. He told her that he would kill her if she didn't cooperate with his demands, and using that looming threat of his Yakuza connections to cause her even more terror. Kind of like Cameron Hooker with the company.
I forgot about that.
So this threat would have caused her even more terror, worrying what would happen if she tried to get away. After this, he forced her to come with him to a nearby hotel, and again, he forced himself on her, threatening to kill her if she fought back or even tried to escape. And while they were at this hotel, Hiroshi made a phone call to some of his friends and actually started to brag about what he had just done. So this is already sick and twisted.
So now I'm assuming that guy that kicked her off her bike was totally in on this or hired by him to do that.
Well, you just may be onto something with that, Rosie. Now, when he was on the phone with his friends, one of them, Jo Ogura, said that he should keep Junko in captivity so they could all do the same thing to her.
Gross.
So around 3 a.m., Hiroshi took Junko to a nearby park and met up with his friends. And Jo Ogura was there, along with another kid, Shinji Minato, and Yasushi Watanabe. And it turns out, as you guessed, Rosie, Shinji Minato was the person who had kicked Junko off of her bike in the first place. So this whole thing had been part of Hiroshi's plan. It was all a setup. At the park, the boys told Junko that they had found her home address written in a notebook that they took from her backpack, and telling her that members of the Yakuza gang would go after her family if she tried to escape or fight back.
Well, with a threat like that, like, I'm sure she felt so stuck. Like, what? She's gonna let them go after her family? Like,
yeah, exactly. They take all of her power away, and this looming threat is just, it takes control over someone's mind.
well, and she's probably like, if I run away now, they'll just get me again later, since they know where I live.
Yeah, exactly. So with that hanging over her, the boys grabbed her and forced her to come with them to a house in the Ayasa district of Adachi, which belonged to Shinji Minato's parents. But they brought her up to a secluded area on the second level of the house, and once they were there, she experienced something I can't imagine living through, but she was forced to live through it, so we're going to talk about it. But again, I'm going to say, listeners, be advised, it gets really rough from this point on. Now, all four of the boys began to overpower her and again sexually assaulted her, and after they finished up this gang rape, they locked Junko up and kept her there.
Now, was this house empty, or were the parents living there?
The parents were living there, and we'll talk a little bit about them later.
Okay.
But Junko's parents obviously noticed that she hadn't come back home, and so on November 27th, which was actually 2 days after she was taken, they contacted the police. At first I was like, why didn't they call right away? But this was 1988, before cell phones, so maybe they just hoped she was staying at a friend's house or something, and it's not like they could text and be like, hey, where are you? But soon after this, the kidnappers forced Junko to call her mother and tell her that she had chosen to run away, but that she was totally safe and just staying with some friends. Can you imagine having to make that phone call and make it believable?
I can't, and I would hope that the parents would be able to read through it. Like, she doesn't seem like the type of kid that would run away.
You would hope. But, I mean, this guy was threatening her to sell it to them,
Right.
And she was almost 18, so I don't know. But, she was just a teenage girl here. I'm a 30-year-old man, and I think even I would burst into tears on the phone in that situation.
Sure.
Like, it would just be so hard. They were literally forcing her to take her own hope of escape away by saying, don't look for me. Now, there are already similarities to the Colin Stan Cameron Hooker story, like I mentioned earlier, having that looming threat of a large, powerful organization coming after you if you try to escape. But there was another odd parallel to that story. And even the Patty Hearst, remember that?
Yeah, the one, she was manipulated even though people thought that she was the one that was crazy.
Yeah.
Right? Something like that.
That was episode 124 if you're curious. But Hiroshi actually forced Junko to call the police herself and tell them to call off the investigation, convince them she was fine.
Wow.
Then, when the parents who owned that house were present, she was forced to pretend that she was their son's girlfriend.
Oh, that's how they got around that.
Yeah, that does explain that away, but it turns out that the Minato parents were actually in fear themselves because they were aware of the Yakuza connection of their son and his friends. Their son had been increasingly violent with them and scaring them. So although they were suspicious, they were too scared to intervene because their son, was part of the Yakuza or, had association with them. So they knew where the family home was. Turns out even the parents were afraid of their son and his friends.
Do you know roughly how old these boys are?
Yeah, they were ages 16 to 18.
Oh my goodness, so they're like kids.
I know. But basically, eventually, the kidnappers dropped this act that this was one of their girlfriends. It's even said that Shinji Minato's brother knew what was going on, but did nothing about it because same reason. And it's easy to look at these situations and be really upset at these people for not doing anything to help out here. But at the same time, I can't imagine living in fear of my own son and his connections to a criminal organization, a massive criminal organization. They were obviously also being manipulated by that idea, similarly to Junko, even though her experience was clearly much worse, and they should have found some way to get her help.
I guess what's really scary about it is the amount of power that these kids apparently possess.
The oldest one was Hiroshi. He was 18, and I think, they ranged in age from 16 to 18.
I mean, that's some real crazy power.
It is.
For a underage child to possess. I can't even imagine they let it go to their head and they could make some really terrible decisions that they regret.
Yeah, no kidding. Because, kids do make dumb decisions.
And lash out when they have emotions.
Yeah, and they don't really understand right from wrong yet. That's why there is age of consent, because legally you're not considered capable of making huge life-altering decisions, so you also are very capable of making really dumb decisions. Anyway, this gang held Junko captive in that house for 40 days straight, where they would constantly assault her, not only sexually, but also physically. They even subjected her to torture. So we're going to go into a little bit of detail here so people can get an idea of what she had to endure while in captivity. But please be warned that it will be really difficult to listen to. What these monsters did to her was so disturbing, degrading, just beyond inhumane. It's hard to hear. But one of the things they did was hold her down. They shaved her pubic area against her will. And they also forced her to dance for them with no clothes on, forced her to touch herself while they washed. Some nights they'd leave her on the second floor balcony of the house all night long with very little clothing to keep warm, outside. They forced her to drink a lot of alcohol, and milk was all they gave her to survive on. And they also forced her to smoke multiple cigarettes at the same time.
Ew.
And even inhale paint thinner. So they were not only forcing her into sexual things, but torturing her with no other motive than just to hurt her.
Right.
Again, idiotic decisions, but kids are not. These kids are obviously a danger to society.
And who's going to stop them? Their own parents won't even put their foot down.
Apparently their parents are helpless. Now, it gets worse from here. They began forcing items inside her, including bottles, metal rods, and even lit matches.
Oh my God.
Apparently at one point, Hiroshi used lighter fluid to burn her legs and arms. Again, this whole group, they were all associated with the Yakuza and regularly engaged in criminal activity like thievery and extortion. But Junko wasn't the only girl that they had assaulted. That December, while she was stuck in this house, they actually kidnapped another unnamed 19-year-old girl who they raped once and then released. So, I don't know why they would feel the need to do that, or just treat her so much differently than they're treating Junko.
Right. Sure.
Obviously that was a horrible situation for her too, but why not release Junko then?
Yeah.
But by the end of December, Junko was severely malnourished from being given only milk to survive. Her burns and injuries had become so bad that she was unable to walk down the stairs to use the bathroom. She was stuck on the top floor in this state of extreme weakness, and you know how burns get when they're not treated. They
fester, they get infected.
Ooze. Ugh. She's just in horrible condition. But still, somehow on January 4th, 1989, after 40 days of captivity, she was challenged to a game of mahjong, and she played against Hiroshi, and she won.
What's mahjong?
It's that game with the tiles.
Like dominoes, almost?
No, I've never played it, so I don't know how it's played, but it's like a tactical, I guess it's like chess maybe, with tiles. Mm-hmm. Like it's you really have to think, I guess. Let's see. This is way too much information for me to distill into a comprehensible thought.
Well, it's almost like some type of card game with tiles.
Yeah, pretty much.
Incorporates chess.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't do more research into Mahjong. All I know is that she beat Hiroshi at Mahjong, but out of anger, he just lost it, and he began violently assaulting Junko in response to this, and the rest of the group followed suit, kicking and punching her. And I know we already gave a warning, but this next part is somehow even worse than before, so please brace yourselves. Again, we only share this because this is what Junko had to endure. The gang members lit a candle and began pouring hot wax on her face. They also forced her to drink her own urine. I'm guessing it was kept up there because she wasn't able to walk down the stairs. And then after enduring all of this, she collapsed on top of a stereo system and began convulsing. Like we mentioned, she was bleeding profusely at this point. Her burns were in an untreated condition, and the gang actually covered their hands with plastic bags so they could continue to assault her without getting their hands dirty with her blood and everything.
I don't even know how they come up with that. These things. Like the candle.
I know. This is some of the worst, maybe the worst stuff I've ever found in a case. And I don't know where these stupid teenage kids came up with all this. It's so inhuman to think of doing this to someone else. Mm-hmm. But they dropped an iron exercise ball on her several times. And
so are they trying to kill her now? Because that's what it sounds like.
I don't know. I mean, we've talked about some other abuse cases where, child abuse, where the parents are extremely violent to their kid, but they don't mean to kill them. They just eventually die because of all the neglect, trauma.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you wouldn't think anyone would expect a person to survive all of this, plus malnourishment. And to add to all that, they also started pouring lighter fluid on her and lighting it. Like, they were basically setting her on fire inside this house. And she fought as hard as she could to put out the fire, but, she was very weak and she gradually faded out of consciousness. And after enduring 2 hours of this brutal, heartless attack, Junko was dead. Just 14 days before her 18th birthday is when she died. So I know that was really difficult to listen to. But again, this is what Junko had to endure in the final days of her life. And I think that details are important to be able to truly grasp what she experienced. Because if it makes me feel this sick just reading it, I can't imagine having to live through it.
So how do we know Junko's story? Who finally...
Well, that's coming up, but we'll get to that.
Okay.
But eventually they did tell.
And I can't believe that the parents living in the same house were able to listen to all this without...
I know.
Coming forward with any information.
I don't know how it's possible. Maybe they weren't home at the time this happened. Like, maybe they only violently assaulted her when the parents weren't home. But at first, once they realized she was dead, they just left her there. But when Shinji Minato's brother called, like, hey, I think this girl's dead, that's when the group finally became afraid of getting in trouble for what they had done. So out of fear, they decided to dispose of her body. They wrapped her in blankets, put her in a travel bag, and then put her in a 55-gallon drum and filled that with concrete. After that, they brought the drum to Koto, Tokyo, and put it in the back of a cement truck. Just under 3 weeks later, the 19-year-old girl that they assaulted in December came forward and reported them, which led to the arrest of Miyano and Agura, and that was on January 23rd, 1989. During the investigation into that, detectives had found some women's underwear in the boys' homes, and this came up during an interrogation on March 29th, 1989 of these boys. They were questioning Miyano about a murder. Again, that's what's his name? Hiroshi Miyano. Who cares? But they were questioning him about a murder, and when this came up, he actually cracked and confessed to the whole thing, the whole Junko Furuta murder.
Wow.
And they told them where to find her.
Wow.
But police were puzzled by this because they were actually asking him about a different murder that happened 9 days prior to when Junko was even kidnapped. So they were like, whoa. We didn't expect to stumble upon this.
Right.
Because last they heard, Junko was just... She was like, stop looking for me, I'm fine. So it's mind-blowing that Hiroshi was so weak, even though he acted like he was so tough to inflict all this pain on Junko, which she was forced to endure, but he could barely endure the police asking him a few questions without breaking down and spilling his deepest, darkest secret.
Well, I think it just goes to show the immaturity of their age.
Yeah.
They're teenagers.
Yeah, that's a good point. But, I mean, even teenagers or not, I think it's a common trait in someone who would do something like this to be weak and insecure on the inside.
Right.
Because, who does this? Now, this case that they were actually questioning them about was a case of a mother and her 7-year-old son that had gone missing. And that case is still unresolved to this day, just in case you were curious about that. Now, the police were able to find Junko's body the next day, and they collected physical evidence, which led them to several more arrests, including Agura, Watanabe, Minato, and his brother, as well as 2 others whose DNA was found in the victim's body, Tetsuo Nakamura and Koichi Ihara. So it wasn't even just this core gang who was taking advantage of this poor girl. There were other people, I guess, that they were saying, hey, come over. We have a girl captive in our house. But what's even more annoying is that at the time of the crime, the identities of all these boys were sealed because they were all juveniles. But that's terrifying, because what if you're friends with them and you didn't know what they had done, you didn't know they were capable of this, and they, got done with their prison sentence or were out on bail or whatever. If they don't release the identities, how are you supposed to know who you're hanging out with?
Word spread around town and stuff, what happened.
Yeah. Actually, a journalist did discover their identities and published them in the magazine that he wrote for. So they stated that given the severity of the crime, the accused did not deserve to have the right to anonymity upheld.
I agree with that.
Yeah. I mean, violent crime is so much worse than any other crime, in my opinion. Especially like this, where it's just so sadistic and inhuman. Now, rather than murder, the boys were charged with, quote, committing bodily injury that resulted in death. Which...
I don't know if I agree with that.
Right? Why not just call it what it is? I don't know if the judge decided to go easy on them because they were teenagers or what, but the ringleader, Hiroshi Miyano, was sentenced to only 17 years in prison. That was the longest sentence. He did try to appeal, and this time there was a judge that actually wasn't going to go easy on him. That judge added 3 more years because he appealed it. Because it was like, seriously? I mean, 17 years, you're already getting off so easy for what you did. Apparently, 20 was the longest possible sentence in Japan at the time, before life in prison.
Okay.
So I'm guessing since he was only 18, they didn't want to go with life. But still, considering what he did, I would have been just fine with this particular 18-year-old getting life in prison.
Right.
Now, on top of that, his mother was ordered to pay 50 million yen, which is equal to $425,000 US dollars, in compensation to the family. Obviously, if he was sentenced in 1990, 20 years. That means he's getting out in 2010, which was already 11 years ago. So this guy's...
So he's out now.
Yeah, he's already been free for 11 years. In 2004, he, I guess, was eligible for parole, but he was denied. And I guess he was actually rearrested in 2013 for fraud, but unfortunately, the charges were dropped because of insufficient evidence. But he had the longest sentence, so it's just terrifying that all the people who committed this horrible crime just a few years before we were born, you know, are free.
That is scary.
Or at least have been released because of this crime. We'll talk a little bit more about the other boys. Now, Minato, this is the one whose house they were holding her at. He was only given 5 to 9 years. His parents and brother weren't charged at all. Not even accomplices or just neglect to
right,
report
you would
a crime.
think they'd get something.
Right? Watanabe was only given 5 to 7 years. And Agura, the one who was like, hey, we should keep her, he was only given 8 years. Now, obviously, these sentences were absolute bullcrap after what these boys had done. Yes, they were very young. Agura was only 16 at the time, but still, danger to society. So anyway, 5 to 9, 5 to 7, and 8 years, they were all out before the 90s were even over.
Wow. You know? When you say it like that, that's pretty crazy.
I know. Been free for most of our lives after doing this. But in 2018, Shinji Minato was arrested again. He was charged with attempted murder because he beat up a 32-year-old man with a metal rod and slashed his throat with a knife.
Oh my gosh.
Right?
So yeah, he really learned his lesson.
Yeah. Clearly, his time served was not therapeutic,
not
or effective.
Rehabilitating.
Yeah. But he wasn't the only one who got rearrested for a violent crime. When Agura was released in 1999, he actually was going around boasting about his role in Junko's kidnapping and death. And I guess that was just fine. But then in 2004, he was arrested again for assaulting someone named Takatoshi Isano because he suspected that this person was involved with his girlfriend. So, obviously, a monster who's very insecure, but this wasn't just like he beat someone up. He actually chased this guy down, started beating him, then kidnapped him, throwing him into his truck, and took him out to a bar that his mother owned, where he held Isano captive for 4 hours, beating him, repeatedly threatening to kill him, and saying he knew how to kill someone and get away with it. And again, after this, he was only sentenced to 7 years. And once again, he's free. Even after 2 horribly violent crimes like this, one ending in a death. And not only that, but apparently he gets some of his values from his mother because she actually vandalized Junko Furuta's grave after this because she said Junko had, quote, ruined her son's life.
Oh, wow. That's inaccurate.
Right?
How could someone be so cruel?
Yeah. Like, have such a warped view of the situation.
I don't even understand. She must be a sociopath because I don't see how you could warp the situation any other way. Right?
It's almost like it's no wonder her son is a monster, because what kind of person would look at this situation where her son took someone's life and blame that person and then go so far as to vandalize the grave of this person your son killed? And as if that's not bad enough, somehow Joe Agura got access to his father's savings account, which was actually set aside to make restitution payments to the Furuta family. But Joe Agura drained this account himself, buying a bunch of expensive luxury goods. So this money that was set aside to make payments by his father for the crime that he committed, he drained
through it.
Yeah. This whole thing is just
no
infuriating to me.
Yeah.
It's clear these sentences were too light, given what they'd done to Junko. But on top of that, clearly, their time in prison just hardened them even more. Mm-hmm. Like, forming them into their full potential as dangerous to society.
It probably just gave them more status in their gang.
Right? It's terrifying that all of these monsters are still free, even after recommitting crimes after getting out. It's just so frustrating. Obviously, the Furuta family was disappointed by the sentence as well, and they actually filed a civil case against the family who owned the house where their daughter was tortured and killed, because, like, why wouldn't they report that? How did this happen in the first place? And they won that civil suit. Thankfully, they finally caught a break. And then on April 2nd, 1989, they did hold a funeral for Junko. The employer from where she planned to start working after graduation gave her parents the uniform she would have worn, which was placed in her casket. And when her class graduated that year, the school gave her diploma to her parents. So,
do you want me to wrap this up by reading the quote that one of her friends read at the funeral?
Yeah.
It says, "Jun-chan, welcome back. I have never imagined that we would see you again in this way. You must have been in so much pain and so much suffering. The hoppy we all made for the school festival looked really good on you. We will never forget you. I have heard that the principal has presented you with a graduation certificate. So we graduated together, all of us. Jun-chan, there is no more pain, no more suffering. Please rest in peace."
Whew. So, that's it for this story.
What is the hoppy they were mentioning in that quote?
Yeah, it's a traditional tube-sleeved Japanese coat.
So kind of like the kimono.
Yeah, well, kind of. I think kimono's more casual. Okay. This is usually only worn during festivals.
Got it.
Kind of looks like a karate coat, you know, when you have the coat on with the belt.
Okay.
It's kind of like that. That's just the thing that comes to my mind when I look at this picture of it. Well, we did it. We made it through this episode.
You were right. It was brutal. And I was kind of thinking in the back of my mind that Junko is going to survive. So that was a even darker twist.
I was hoping. It's a really sad story. I didn't know how terrible it would be until I was already pretty far into it. Mm-hmm. And, I'm not going to not tell a story on here just because it's really terrible. Because obviously, like I mentioned several times, if they had to live through it, then
we can at least voice the words of what happened to them.
Exactly. Okay, well, thank you all so much for listening. We really appreciate you.
Let me read this 5-star review.
Yeah.
This is from Orale of the USA. It's entitled, "Love This. I listen to quite a few podcasts weekly during my walks. Midweek, I always look forward to this one. Cases are varied, and the discussion is always enjoyable, like we're all having coffee, chilling out, and chatting. Love both Ryan and Rosie."
Thank you, Orale. Appreciate that. And I want to apologize to everyone that I'm a little dull during this episode. I am not feeling very well, but I tried my best.
You did good.
So thank you for putting up with that. And do you have anything else you want to say before we go, Rosie?
I just hope everyone's enjoying their summer.
Yeah,
it's already almost mid-July, which is kind of wild.
It is really crazy. Time just doesn't stop.
I know, it always flies, especially in these summer months. Especially when you're from Wisconsin or Minnesota.
Every year it flies a little faster. But that's where we'll wrap it up. So thank you, and we'll talk to you next time.
Bye.